When I first started working at the Mall of America, I thought it was just another retail job. Nothing more than long shifts behind a counter, answering customers' questions, and sweeping up the endless tide of paper cups and receipts that trailed behind them. At first glance, the mall was everything you would expect it to be: bright, polished, loud, and endlessly busy. Families came for the theme park rides, teenagers loitered with bags of food court snacks, and tourists pointed cameras at everything from the aquarium tanks to the Lego statues towering over the atrium. It was, on the surface, the picture of American consumerism at its peak. But from the very first day, I had the faint impression that something was off. It was never one obvious thing, nothing I could point to directly. It was in the way the air felt heavier in some hallways, the way certain shopfronts never seemed to have the same staff twice, or how some corners of the mall seemed too dim even under industrial lights that were never switched off. The place was so vast, so labyrinthine, that the sense of being lost lingered even after I knew my way around. My induction was like any other job at first: signing papers, being handed a uniform, being walked through schedules and procedures. But then the manager slid across a second folder, one marked in red ink. "These," he said in a voice too calm, "are the rules you'll follow here. They're non-negotiable." I thought it was odd, because the rules weren't just about shifts or customer service. They were strange, oddly specific, and written with a seriousness that unsettled me. At the time, I laughed it off. Rules like, do not look directly at the mannequins in store 237 after closing, or, if you hear music from the rotunda when the mall is locked, ignore it and keep walking. They read more like urban legends or pranks than anything else. I figured it was part of the initiation, something to spook the new hires, keep them on their toes. But the tone of my manager's voice, the way he avoided eye contact as he explained them, told me he wasn't joking. The first few weeks passed without incident, though I never shook the unease those rules had planted in me. I worked mostly evening shifts, and while the daytime bustle drowned out any sense of strangeness, once the shops began to close, the atmosphere shifted. The mall at night was a different creature entirely. The laughter, the noise, the energy, it all drained away, leaving behind an echoing hollow space where the sound of a single footstep could travel endlessly down the empty corridors. Even then, I told myself I was imagining things. Everyone gets spooked when a place is too big, too empty. Yet the feeling grew stronger each night. The escalators seemed louder when no one was riding them, humming mechanically in a rhythm that almost sounded alive. The air vents whispered in ways that resembled voices. And when I passed certain storefronts, especially the ones where the mannequins stood too close to the glass, I swore I saw their heads tilted slightly, their blank faces fixed on me. I tried to ignore it. I clung to the comfort of routine, clocking in, performing the same tasks, and pretending the strangeness wasn't creeping further into my awareness. But the mall has a way of wearing you down. Its sheer size makes you feel small, insignificant, like you've been swallowed by something that isn't just concrete and glass, but something alive, something breathing beneath its polished surface. And slowly, I began to realize the rules weren't written as warnings for fun. They were survival guides. The first time I broke one, I understood why they existed. The rules had been tucked inside a thin red folder, no thicker than a handful of pages. Yet it carried a weight that unsettled me more with every passing day. The cover bore no logo, no label, only that single streak of red ink scrawled diagonally across it like a warning. Inside, the paper was crisp, the writing neat, but the content was far from ordinary. It wasn't about opening duties, customer complaints, or safety procedures. Instead, it read like a mixture of folklore, ritual, and threat. The first few rules seemed strange but almost harmless. Do not walk past the carousel in Nickelodeon Universe after midnight. Do not step onto an escalator that is already moving when the mall is closed. If you hear tapping on the glass from the aquarium tunnel when you are alone, do not respond. They were worded plainly, but the precision of each detail left me uneasy. Someone had gone out of their way to record these instructions, to ensure they were followed exactly. The further I read, the stranger the rules became. Do not speak to anyone you see in the maintenance tunnels unless they speak first, and even then, do not look at their face. Do not enter the lifts after 2:13 a.m., no matter who calls you inside. Never watch the mannequins for longer than 3 seconds at night. If a child asks you for help after closing, do not follow them. My fingers trembled as I turned each page, feeling like I was holding a list of secrets never meant for public eyes. I remember asking my manager about them once, trying to laugh it off. Are these a joke? Some weird employee hazing thing? He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared past me, lips pressed tight, as if I had asked a question I should never have spoken aloud. Finally, he muttered, "Just follow them. Don't ask again." Then he walked away. His reaction rattled me far more than the rules themselves. For weeks, I kept the folder folded at the bottom of my locker, rereading it during breaks. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, stories invented by bored night staff to spook new hires. But the phrasing of each rule, the clinical seriousness with which it was written, told a different story. These weren't legends. These were observations, gathered carefully and passed down because ignoring them had consequences. One night, I noticed something new. A faint smudge on the bottom of the last page, like a fingerprint pressed into the paper with too much force. I rubbed my thumb across it and realized it wasn't ink. It was old, dried blood. My stomach twisted. I slammed the folder shut and shoved it back into the locker. But even after the metal door clanged closed, I could still feel the weight of it pressing against me, heavy and undeniable. From that point on, I obeyed every word. I followed each instruction as if my life depended on it, because deep down I was starting to believe it did. The Mall of America wasn't just a mall. It was something far older, far hungrier, and the rules weren't suggestions. They were boundaries, written in red ink to mark the line between the ordinary and whatever it was that prowled its halls after dark. And when I broke one for the first time, I learned quickly that the rules were not written to frighten. They were written to warn. Most shoppers never realize the mall has another side. A hidden skeleton of corridors, storage rooms, and maintenance tunnels stretching behind the glittering shopfronts. Customers see the polished marble floors, the glowing signs, the endless rows of clothes and food counters, but they never glimpse what lies just beyond the staff-only doors. For us employees, those hallways were shortcuts, arteries of the mall that kept it alive. But they also carried a silence that pressed down like a weight. I discovered quickly that the back halls felt different from the rest of the mall. They were narrower, colder, and lit with buzzing fluorescent strips that flickered as if tired of their own glow. The walls were painted an institutional beige, scuffed and marked with years of trolleys, boxes, and forgotten deliveries. Walking through them alone was like stepping into another world entirely. A world that didn't belong to the laughing crowds outside. The first time I walked those halls late at night, the air shifted. The hum of the public spaces was gone, replaced by the creaks of unseen pipes, the groan of machinery, and the soft tap-tap-tap of dripping water that seemed to echo too far. My footsteps felt too loud, my breathing ragged, as though the corridors themselves were listening. I passed locked doors that bore no labels, doors I never saw anyone open. Yet the faint sense of movement always lingered on the other side, as though something waited there, watching. It was in those halls that I began to notice the rules tightening their grip on me. One of them specifically read, "Do not look directly at reflections in the staff hallway mirrors after 11 p.m. I hadn't thought much of it until I came across one by accident. It was a long, tall mirror bolted carelessly to the wall, its surface warped and slightly cracked. I tried to glance away, to obey the rule, but my eyes betrayed me. For a fraction of a second I looked. The reflection wasn't wrong, not entirely. It was me, standing there, shoulders hunched, uniform wrinkled from the shift. But something in its expression didn't belong to me. Its eyes were wider, too wide, and its lips seemed to curve into the faintest grin, though my own mouth was firmly closed. I forced myself to look away, my heart hammering, refusing to glance back no matter how strong the pull. I hurried down the hallway, trying to shake the image, but I knew I had seen something I wasn't meant to. The rules weren't arbitrary. They were barriers, thin lines drawn between me and something that lived just beyond the surface of the mall. something that could bleed into the ordinary world if I gave it too much attention. From that night on, I walked the staff corridors faster, my eyes fixed ahead, refusing to linger. Yet the rules became harder to follow the deeper I went. Some nights, the fluorescent lights cut out for no reason, leaving me in absolute darkness with only the memory of those mirrors pressing against my mind. Other nights, I heard the shuffle of footsteps echoing just a step behind me, though when I turned, the hallway stretched out empty and still. It was in one of those moments, when the silence became unbearable, that I finally heard it. My name, whispered low and drawn out, seeping from the cracks in one of the unmarked doors. The voice was faint but deliberate, calling me closer. I remembered the rule. Do not answer voices in the maintenance corridors. My throat went dry, and every nerve screamed for me to run. I pressed forward without looking back, walking faster, then faster still, until I burst through the exit into the bright emptiness of the closed food court. I had obeyed the rule that time, but as the echoes of my name faded from my ears, I realized something dreadful. The voice hadn't just whispered, it had promised to call again. The mannequins were always there, silent and still, scattered throughout the mall behind their glass displays. In the daytime, they blended into the background, lifeless props dressed in the latest fashions. Customers hardly glanced at them, and I tried not to either. But at night, when the crowds disappeared and the mall's hollow silence settled in, those mannequins became something else entirely. They were no longer decorations. They were watchers. There was a rule written plainly in that red-inked folder. Never speak of the mannequins. Do not describe what you think you see them doing. Do not tell anyone where they move or when they move. If you are asked, deny everything. First, it sounded ridiculous. They were mannequins, nothing more. Yet, after a few late shifts, I began to notice what the rule was really protecting us from. It started subtly. I would close up for the night, walk past a clothing store, and feel a prickling on the back of my neck, as though eyes were following me. The figures behind the glass seemed closer to the front than I remembered. Their blank faces pressed against the displays, tilted ever so slightly toward me. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Long hours and dim lighting play tricks on the mind. But then the changes became too precise, too deliberate. One evening, I swore the mannequin in store 237, the one in the corner wearing a red jacket, had shifted its head. Just a little. Just enough for me to notice. When I passed the shop again 10 minutes later, its head was turned completely, its sightless face angled straight toward the staff corridor I had just exited. I froze, unable to move, a chill crawling up my spine. The next night, the same mannequin wasn't in the corner at all. It was standing near the glass front, red jacket gleaming under the store lights. I hadn't seen anyone touch it. I hadn't seen anyone move it. But there it stood, closer than before, waiting. The rule told me not to speak of it, so I didn't. I swallowed my fear, buried it in silence, and forced myself to walk on as though nothing was wrong. But the more I ignored them, the bolder they became. Some nights, I caught glimpses of mannequins gathered in clusters that hadn't been there during the day, their pale hands raised toward one another as if frozen mid-conversation. Other times, I saw empty display windows where I knew mannequins had stood hours before. One night, after closing, I lingered too long. I was sweeping near a storefront when I realized every mannequin in sight. 5 of them, dressed in dull shades of gray, was facing me. Not the passers-by that never came, not the shoppers that would arrive in the morning. Me. Their heads angled low, like vultures waiting to descend. I dropped the broom and fled into the staff corridor, refusing to look back until the heavy door shut between us. I never mentioned it to anyone. That's the cruelest part of the rule. Not just the fear of seeing them move, but the silence it demands. To speak of them is to acknowledge them, and acknowledgement seems to be what they hunger for. I learned quickly that silence was my only shield. But silence offers no comfort, only isolation. And in that isolation, the mannequins grew braver still. The last time I saw them, they weren't behind glass at all. The escalators were always in motion, an endless cycle of steps rising and falling, carrying shoppers from floor to floor. In the daytime, Their hum was drowned beneath laughter, chatter, and the shuffle of feet. But at night, when the mall emptied and silence fell, their steady drone became something different. A heartbeat echoing through the steel and glass, a pulse that felt alive. The rules had been clear. Do not step onto an escalator after midnight if it is already moving. Wait until it stops. If it does not stop, take another route. I had read that line a dozen times, never quite understanding it. Surely escalators were always moving. Surely it was a meaningless warning. But the first time I worked a closing shift that stretched past midnight, I realized the truth. That night, the mall was quieter than I had ever known it, every sound amplified by the cavernous halls. I finished my tasks and headed toward the exit, only to find my usual route blocked by a maintenance team. With no choice, I circled back, weaving through darkened corridors until I reached the main atrium. There, in the center, an escalator still moved, steps gliding upward though no one was near. It shouldn't have been running. Power was cut to most sections of the mall after closing. Yet it carried on, whispering upward as though inviting me to step on. I stopped at the bottom, staring at its silver teeth as they appeared and vanished in an endless rhythm. The air felt colder near it, heavier, as if the escalator itself exhaled a chill. For reasons I couldn't explain, my pulse quickened. I remembered the rule. Do not step onto an escalator after midnight if it is already moving. So I waited, shifting uncomfortably, glancing over my shoulder at the empty atrium. Minutes passed. The escalator never stopped. I told myself it was nothing, that the rules were just nonsense, that the machine was on a separate timer, but still I couldn't move. Something about its motion seemed wrong. The steps didn't glide smoothly. They lurched faintly, like they were straining under a weight I couldn't see. And as I watched, I noticed something worse. The sound. The hum of an escalator is usually mechanical, predictable. This one had a rhythm, a cadence almost like breath. A drawn-out inhale, a rasping exhale, rising and falling with every loop. The steps clicked and groaned as if something heavy rode them, invisible but very much present. My skin crawled. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the moving stairs, until I found another hallway leading around it. Later that week, I overheard another employee whispering about the escalators. She said she had seen one moving long past midnight, carrying shadows that weren't there. She said a coworker once ignored the rule, stepped onto it, and never made it off. When the escalator stopped, it was empty. He was gone. His shift badge turned up 2 days later, resting neatly at the bottom step as if placed there deliberately. I never doubted the rule again. Every night after midnight, if I saw an escalator still running, I turned the other way. Sometimes it stopped after I left, sometimes it didn't. But once, just once, I made the mistake of looking back over my shoulder. The escalator was still moving, and this time I wasn't alone at the bottom. The rotunda was the mall's heart, a wide, circular space where concerts, fashion shows, and public events filled the air with music and light. By day, it was alive with families, children, and the endless murmur of voices. But at night, when the shutters rolled down and the mall exhaled its last echoes of commerce, the rotunda became something else entirely, an empty stage for things that did not belong to daylight. There was a rule written plainly in the red folder. If you hear music from the rotunda after closing, ignore it. Do not approach. Do not look. At first, it seemed laughable. Music was everywhere in the mall, drifting from shop speakers or faintly leaking from the theme park rides. But once you stood in the rotunda after midnight, you understood. The silence there was absolute, oppressive. Any sound that broke it was not natural. It was 2 in the morning when I first heard it. My shift had run late, and I was making my way across the second-floor walkway that overlooked the rotunda. Below, the polished floor gleamed under dim security lights. That's when it began. Faint at first, like the pluck of strings in the distance, then growing clearer, music. It was an old tune, something classical, haunting, played on a piano that echoed against the glass walls. The notes wavered, drawn out, almost human in the way they sighed. I froze. No one should have been there. The grand piano used for events was locked away in storage, and the sound system had been shut down hours earlier. Yet the melody drifted upward, filling the cavernous chamber with ghostly resonance. My instinct was to lean over the railing, to peer down into the empty circle and see where the sound came from. But the rule clawed its way into my thoughts. Do not approach. Do not look. I stayed rooted, every muscle tense, listening as the music swelled. The longer I stood there, the more wrong it became. The notes weren't just notes anymore. They were voices, layered and tangled, groaning beneath the melody as though hundreds of throats sang in unison. Some whispered, some cried, some laughed faintly, a hollow laughter that made my stomach twist. The tune spiraled faster, frantic, until it no longer resembled music but something wild and broken. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside me, reverberating through my bones, a vibration that rattled my teeth and made my vision blur. I stumbled back, forcing myself down the hallway, away from the railing, refusing to glance back no matter how strong the pull became. Only when I reached the safety of the staff corridor did the sound falter, cut short as if it had never existed at all. The next morning, I overheard security talking. One guard mentioned faint piano music the night before, and how another had gone down to check it out. They never found him. His torch was discovered lying in the center of the rotunda, beam pointing up toward the ceiling, but he was gone. No cameras had recorded him leaving. I didn't tell them I had heard it too. I didn't admit how close I had come to breaking the rule. But as I walked through the mall that day, I couldn't shake the sense that the rotunda wasn't empty. It was waiting, and I feared that next time, I might not have the strength to walk away. The mall had storage rooms everywhere, behind shops, beneath stairwells, tucked in the shadow of service corridors where most shoppers would never dream of wandering. Some were used for cleaning supplies, others for seasonal decorations, and a few were sealed so tightly I doubted anyone had opened them in years. At first, I thought they were nothing more than ordinary storage, the forgotten skeletons of a building too big for itself. But then I found the rule. Do not linger near storage rooms after dark. If you hear movement inside, do not open the door. If the door is already open, do not look in. I didn't take it seriously until the night I had to deliver stock after closing. The route carried me deeper into the service corridors than usual, past a row of unmarked doors with rusted handles. Most were padlocked, but one stood ajar, a thin crack of blackness spilling out into the dim hallway. I slowed as I approached, my footsteps echoing against the concrete floor, and for a moment I thought I heard something faint from within, like the scrape of boxes or the drag of cloth over cement. I told myself it was rats. That was the sensible answer. But then it came again, sharper this time. A heavy thud, followed by a sound like breathing. Low, labored, wet. My throat tightened. The rule echoed in my mind. Do not look in. I kept walking, forcing my eyes ahead, but every instinct screamed to turn back. My peripheral vision caught a flicker of movement inside the room, something pale shifting against the dark. I quickened my pace, gripping the box so tightly my knuckles ached, refusing to glance back. The hallway felt longer than it should have, stretching and narrowing until I reached the safety of a lit junction. Later that week, I overheard another employee whispering about those rooms. He said sometimes doors opened on their own, and shadows spilled out that didn't belong to anything inside. He said one man made the mistake of stepping into one after hearing a child's cry, and he was never seen again. Only his shoes were found, placed neatly in the hallway outside. I avoided the storage rooms after that, always taking longer routes if I had to. But avoidance didn't mean safety, because one night, as I walked past a locked door, I heard my name whispered from inside. Not faintly, not like before in the corridors, but clearly. So close it felt as though lips were pressed against the wood. I froze, heart hammering, refusing to respond. My silence seemed to anger it. The door rattled violently, the handle jerking up and down, as though something inside clawed to get out. I staggered back, box slipping from my hands, and ran without daring to look over my shoulder. When I returned the next day, the door was still locked. No signs of struggle, no scratches, no damage. But lying on the floor just outside was a folded piece of paper, crumpled and damp. On it, scrawled in jagged red ink, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. I see you. Among all the strange instructions in the red folder, one rule unsettled me more than most. Do not stare into the security cameras for longer than 5 seconds. If you see movement inside the feed that does not match reality, do not acknowledge it. First, I thought it was absurd. Cameras were machines, cold, mechanical, predictable. But as with all the rules, I would learn too late why it existed. One evening, I was assigned to assist a security officer with closing procedures. He was older, his uniform faded, his eyes hollow from years of night shifts. We sat in the monitoring room, walls lined with glowing screens that showed every corner of the mall. For a while it was ordinary, empty food courts, still escalators, shuttered storefronts. But as the minutes crawled past midnight, the atmosphere changed. The feeds began to blur and flicker, shadows stretching too far, shapes lingering where no one should be. I noticed one screen in particular, the camera over the East Atrium. At first, it showed nothing but the darkened hall. Then a figure appeared, faint, standing near the center. I leaned closer, squinting, but the officer's hand shot out, gripping my wrist hard. "Don't," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't look too long." But it was already too late. The figure on the screen grew clearer the longer I stared. It wasn't a person, not exactly. Its proportions were wrong, too thin, too tall, its limbs bending at angles that defied the body. It stood perfectly still, yet its head twitched violently in small jerks, as though trying to shake itself free of the image. My breath caught. I glanced at the officer beside me, then back at the screen, and my blood turned to ice. The figure was gone from the camera. But in the reflection of the glass, just for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw it standing behind us. I tore my eyes away, forcing myself to look down at the floor, every instinct screaming. The officer switched off the monitor with a trembling hand, his face pale. "Never look too long," he muttered. "Once they know you're watching, they want to be seen somewhere else." From then on, I avoided the monitoring room. But the cameras were everywhere, mounted on ceilings, staring down with their unblinking eyes. Sometimes, when I walked beneath them, I swore I felt them tilt slightly, following my movements. Once, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the black dome of a camera, only it wasn't quite me. The figure staring back wore my uniform, but its face was blurred, features smudged into something wrong. I blinked hard, and it was gone. Just a reflection, just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew the truth. The cameras weren't just watching. They were doorways, windows into something else. And if you look too long, something on the other side might decide to look back. The last time I passed the East Atrium, one of the cameras swiveled to face me directly. The red light blinked once, twice, like a recording heartbeat. Then, faintly, I heard the whirring gears whisper a single word, stretched thin and mechanical. My name. Every mall employee knew about him, though no one ever spoke his name aloud. He had worked there long before me, and his story lingered like a stain no one could scrub clean. Officially, he had left his position suddenly, but the whispers told something else. He was the last one who dared to break the rules. I first heard fragments from the janitors, muttered in half-sentences while they pushed their brooms down the gleaming halls. They said he'd laughed at the rules, claimed they were nonsense, superstitions meant to scare the new hires. He made it his mission to break them, daring himself night after night. And for a while, nothing happened. He mocked the mannequins, rode the escalators after midnight, even whistled back when he heard the rotunda's music drifting through the dark. Nothing touched him. Nothing took him. But the rules don't break without consequence. Sometimes they bide their time, waiting for the perfect moment. The first sign came when he stopped showing up on the cameras. Other employees would walk past him in the hallways, speak to him, even share breaks. But when the footage was checked later, he was never there. His presence left no trace, no shadow, no shape in the lens. It was as though the mall itself refused to acknowledge him. Then came the whispers. At first, They echoed in the staff corridors. His name carried on invisible breaths. Then they began to answer him directly, repeating his words seconds after he spoke. Imagine talking to a coworker and hearing your own voice echo back from behind a locked storage door. He laughed at it, of course, treated it like a joke. But laughter doesn't protect you. One night, he broke the final rule. He went into the rotunda after midnight, following the music instead of walking away. Security found the place empty. The piano lid closed, but there was blood smeared across the marble floor in long, dragging arcs that led to nowhere. No body, no sign of struggle. Just red streaks that faded before they reached the exit. The next morning, his locker was open, uniform neatly folded inside. Resting on top of the folded shirt was a crumpled sheet of paper, the same kind used in the rule folder. Written across it, in jagged red letters, was a single line. The rules are not to be broken. After that, no one dared question them again. Even the managers kept their silence, never admitting what they had seen, never explaining what had happened. But the older employees still whispered about him in the dark, warning the new hires. They said if you listen closely after closing, you can still hear his footsteps echoing in the service corridors, just behind you but never quite catching up. Some even claimed to have seen him, wandering the mall in his old uniform, head bowed, face blurred into something that wasn't human anymore. They called him the price of disobedience, a reminder carved into the mall itself. I used to dismiss their stories until one night, alone in the corridor, I dropped my torch. It rolled across the floor and came to rest against a pair of shoes. Shoes that were standing exactly where no one should have been. Slowly, I raised my eyes. The figure was there. Uniform faded, shoulders slumped, head hanging low. And when it lifted its face to meet mine, I realized the truth. The rules didn't just protect us from the mall. They protected us from becoming part of it. By now, I had stopped questioning the rules. They were carved into my routine, etched into my nerves like second nature. But still, some gnawing part of me needed to understand. Why this mall? Why such strange laws of survival? Why did the shadows crawl closer at night? Why did the cameras show things that should not exist? Why did mannequins sometimes breathe when no one was watching? The answers I would discover lay not above, but beneath. One stormy night, the power flickered. Not out completely, but just enough to plunge the corridors into a half-light that made every corner pulse with darkness. The emergency generators kicked in, and in that dim glow, the escalator near the west atrium began to descend. Not up, not down, but further than the building was ever meant to go. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the humming steps seemed to vanish into a place deeper than the basement level. A place that wasn't supposed to exist. Compelled by equal parts terror and curiosity, I followed. The air grew heavy the further I descended. A wet, earthy smell clung to every breath, as though the mall's gleaming tiles sat upon rotting soil. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a tunnel, a vast chamber stretching into darkness. The walls weren't brick or concrete, but something older, stone-carved and worn smooth, etched with symbols that looked wrong in the human eye, as though the shapes shifted when you tried to hold them in focus. I realized then, the mall was built on top of something ancient. Not by mistake, but deliberately. The rules weren't random, they were rituals. Boundaries drawn to keep whatever lived down there in place. The music, the mannequins, the cameras, the mirrors, they weren't oddities. They were locks. Each one a seal against the thing beneath. The presence that stirred when humans lingered too long where they shouldn't. And it was stirring now. The ground trembled faintly under my feet. The air buzzed with static, as though hundreds of voices whispered in unison just beyond the range of hearing. I turned to retreat, but the escalator was gone. The way back had folded into the dark, leaving me alone with the thing that moved below. From the shadows of the tunnel, shapes began to emerge, some wearing uniforms like mine, some half-finished like mannequins, others crawling on all fours. I knew them, employees, the ones who had vanished, their faces blurred, stretched, erased, yet I recognized the hollow weight in their movements. They hadn't been taken away, they had been claimed. And then I understood the final, unspoken truth. The mall wasn't cursed. It was hungry. Every rule was not just to protect us, but to feed it in controlled portions. A system of balance. A bargain struck long ago, obey and you are spared. Break them and you are offered. The air split open with a sound like tearing metal, and from the tunnel's depths, something vast began to rise. I never saw its face. Perhaps it has none, but the weight of its presence alone bent me to my knees. It smelled of mold and old earth, of dust locked away for centuries, of the silence of the grave. In that moment I knew two things. One, the rules would never save me now. And two, someone else would find the red folder in the break room after I was gone. The pages neatly stacked, the ink sharp and fresh. The rules would remain. The mall would remain. And I would become just another shadow in its endless hunger. Because the truth beneath the Mall of America is simple. It isn't a place for shopping. It's a mouth. And all of us are only ever standing on its tongue.